Have you been arrested so far?
Yes, I have. I was out on the roads on Tuesday.
And that was the first and only time you've been arrested throughout this protest. But you seem to have got out relatively quickly. And will you be back on the roads?
Yes, although we may be used to leaders not following their, words with actions, Insulate Britain, we are committed to being steadfast. As soon as a meaningful statement is released, we will get off the roads.
What do you mean by that, a meaningful statement?
Oh, I think you know what I mean. We're all used to being told things and then not seeing the action come through. This problem of insulation has been kicked about for 2 decades, hasn't it? So we don't want empty words. We want Boris, similar to what he was saying when he spoke to the UN, I was really quite proud of him. Can't believe I'm saying that.
You were proud of Boris Johnson, were you?
I know, right? But he admitted, he said sorry for adding to the climate denial that's got us into such a mess. And he acknowledged what an emotional problem, difficulty it is to accept the
severity. Well, this is remarkably magnanimous of you, Tracey Mallaghan. Could you potentially, in this magnanimous mood, recognise that the United Kingdom has done more than any G20 country in the last 30 years to lessen CO2 emissions?
Oh, come on, that's not quite true, is it? A lot of what our CO2, that we use to produce our goods and stuff is done in other countries. So that's not really accurate to say that.
Well,
I do think
it clearly is. Lots of countries do importing. If we're comparing to similar first world countries, clearly the United Kingdom has done a huge amount to reduce CO2. And I just wonder why it is that we seem to have very, very intense climate action in this country, clearly a world leader in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. When you look at countries like Canada, for example, that have actually been on the wrong trend in recent years in terms of their CO2 output, there's basically no movement at all.
Oh, come on. Boris himself said at that UN conversation he'd got things wrong. He'd join in with the climate denial. And do you know what I hear as a mum when people say things like that? It sounds a little bit like, oh, but mum, everyone else is doing it. And that didn't get my kids anywhere. We did start the Industrial Revolution, right? And a lot of people seem to feel shame about that. And we don't have to if we accept that it had consequences we didn't intend and we agree to get on with the job. We only have to feel ashamed of that if we keep denying that it's a problem. If we come up with the right solutions, other countries will follow us, just like they, came over here to learn how to make steel and stuff. So I do think that we can show the right way.
I'm sure that it seems peculiar here because you seem to be saying relatively sensible things now. But then when it comes to actually acting about it, you go and lie in a road. And I'm just not quite sure how lying in a road is really going to help anyone when it comes to this conversation. Now, I follow someone on Twitter, a former member of Extinction Rebellion. You might know her. She's called Zion Lights. And she actually left Extinction Rebellion and is now doing something proactive. She's going around the country campaigning in favour of nuclear power. Why don't you do something like that? Why don't you join her campaign to do something that would actually lessen the CO2 in this country? Rather than, and you mentioned that you're a mother, blocking roads, blocking families, blocking potentially ambulances, maybe causing accidents, causing chaos. Why don't you do something useful instead?
I am just a mum and I'm very new to this game. I hadn't even heard of the climate crisis or activism. I thought Swampy was a bit of a div. I had a lot of things wrong in my own head. But what we've seen and the people I've met for decades, we've tried all the normal forms of protest. The government have shut them down. This level of disruption is needed because we're talking about saving over 8,000 people dying from the choice between heating or eating that's been ignored for decades.
I just find
we do need to get on with the job.
I find this extraordinary. The United Kingdom, well before you decided to lie in any roads, is hosting COP26. Boris Johnson just flew across the Atlantic to galvanise the world, to come to Glasgow in a couple of months' time, to try and reach an accord that will actually lessen the amount of CO2 in the world and reach net zero. And many countries have followed the UK, the first country in the world to commit to net zero. That all happened before your group started lying in roads. Do you think you've actually changed anything at all?
Yeah, I think what Boris Johnson said, I think we can all agree it was a bit difficult to hear Boris telling everyone to grow up while he talked about romper rooms, the Muppets, and that he personally had treated the world like his own personal toy. But like I said, he also told some truth. This is a huge crisis. It's emotionally really difficult to understand the state that we're in, and the solutions are in coming together,
But
being
Tracey,
truthful
just
about it.
answer the question there. Do you think that anything that's happened over the last 6 months with this government has actually been influenced by deciding to block the port of Dover?
For sure, right? So I heard about that our government, our parliament, had declared a climate emergency in October 19, and I heard that because of protesters. There was a couple of seconds on the news, and I couldn't believe it. What do you mean my government's declared an emergency and I don't know? So I went onto a website, and it's true. They declared it in May, but the media hadn't got on board. The government hadn't sent out messaging to everyone, and that horrified me. And I didn't want to be a protester, so then I went to a council meeting. And one of those councillors said, we can't tell people the truth unless we make it happy because people will get depressed and do nothing. And what you're seeing here is that not all of us will get depressed and do nothing.